Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM and UPTV. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or UPTV. These views are my own, and in this instance also maybe some views that you will hear leaking through from the articles that I read, but basically these are my views and you can blame me and no one else but me. Anyway, it's been a couple of weeks on the radio side. It's only been a week on the TV side. I don't even know. It gets very confusing because of the way that this show is done. But I do know it's been a couple of weeks as far as the radio show goes. And I was going to record one last week, but it was just right before the election. And every time I record a show right before the election, it ends up being something that I can't use because the election goes some completely different way. So it's like it will come out after the election, and you'll be sitting there listening to me pontificate about what might happen, and it's not what happens at least half the time. It's certainly not the last time. So anyway, squeaky chair again. Reasons to be optimistic. Well, we won, for one thing. And that's, it is momentous, it is joyous, it is all sorts of things. It's also, what do I want to say, nerve-wracking, because the current occupant of the White House has proven himself to be so unstable and so vindictive and so unconcerned about really the consequences for anyone but him, that the consequences of his actions for anyone but him, that I dread what he's going to do for his remaining time there. And it's going to be almost certainly something awful. I don't know, but it's he's been awful so far. I don't see why he's going to stop now. But anyway, I have a couple of articles about Biden and his immigration policy that I thought would be very germane at this point, because a lot of us that I know were voting not so much for anyone, but against someone in particular. And so they weren't all that concerned about what Biden was planning on doing, just so long as it was him doing it and not Trump. So I think this would be a good time to hurry up and familiarize ourselves with what Biden actually plans to do. How much of it he'll be able to get done, I don't know. At this moment, indications are that it'll probably still be a Republican-controlled Senate. We won't know. There are two runoff elections in Georgia that have never done very well for Democrats down there. But given the fact that Georgia turned blue this year, and people are fired up and motivated, and they see now the potential difficulty inherent in allowing the Republicans to remain the majority in the Senate, they might be willing to step up and do something about it. I mean, I know that a lot of people will try, but maybe that extra effort that led to a enormous turnout in this last election will lead to a similar turnout for this runoff in Georgia, and perhaps, possibly, maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to keep my fingers crossed or anything, because the big money and the dirty tricksters are going to be out in force. but could be. So I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, let's hear a little bit about Biden's plans here. The first article is entitled "A Biden Immigration Policy: New Hope for Immigrants and Businesses." Joe Biden is the next president of the United States. Unless Democrats win 2 runoff elections in Georgia, Biden may not have a Democrat majority in the Senate, making ambitious immigration legislation more challenging. Despite that, Joe Biden will have an opportunity to enact significant changes to U.S. immigration policy. By 2021, Donald Trump will have reduced legal immigration by up to 49% since becoming president, without any change in U.S. immigration law, according to a National Foundation for American Policy analysis. Reducing legal immigration most harms refugees, employers, and Americans who want to live with their spouses, parents, or children, but it also affects the country's future labor force and economic growth. Average annual labor force growth, a key component of the nation's economic growth, will be approximately 59% lower as a result of the administration's immigration policies, if the policies continue, according to the National Foundation for American Policy. Reversing these policies could be a vital part of the Biden immigration agenda. If the Biden administration understands only one thing about business immigration, it should be this: H-1B visas are inextricably linked with the ability of highly educated people to become employment-based immigrants and eventually American citizens. Restrictions on H-1B visas can prevent the next potential founder of a billion-dollar company from gaining a green card, and certainly will hurt international students. In addition to academic research that shows imposing H-1B restrictions push more jobs outside the United States, the country's future can be affected in other ways. 75%, 30 out of 40, of the finalists of the 2016 Intel Science Talent Search had parents who worked in America on H-1B visas. Legislative reforms could make it easier for individuals to gain permanent residence without an H-1B, but until that happens, if it ever does, an H-1B will remain the only practical way for many people to work long-term in the United States, including international students. Approximately 75 to 80% of full-time graduate students in key technology fields at U.S. universities are international students. H-1B visa holders understand that H-1B status is part of the American dream for many outstanding future immigrants, which is why Stephen Miller, the chief architect of the Trump administration's immigration policies, focused so much energy on restricting H-1B visas. The Trump administration did not pursue merit-based immigration. Denial rates for new H-1B petitions for initial employment rose from 6% in federal year 2015 29% through the second quarter of federal year 2020, according to a National Foundation for American Policy analysis. An April 2020 proclamation blocked the entry of legal immigrants to the United States in nearly all categories, including employment-based immigrants. Before a judge issued a preliminary injunction against it in October, a June 2020 proclamation suspended the entry of foreign nationals on H-1B, L-1, and certain other temporary visas. In October 2020, the Trump administration issued 3 new regulations that would profoundly change and broadly restrict H-1B visas. The Department of Labor's DOL rule that inflates salaries for H-1B visa holders and employment-based immigrants. The Department of Homeland Security's H-1B rule that changes the definition of a specialty occupation and seeks to codify restrictions against companies whose H-1B employees conduct work at customer locations, and a rule to eliminate the H-1B lottery and replace it with a highest to lowest salary system likely to shut out international students and younger information technology professionals. Legal challenges to the regulations may tell much of the story of the Trump administration's legacy on H-1B visa policy. Companies will be relieved if a Biden administration returns U.S. citizenship and immigration services policies to those of the Obama administration, and there is a reasonable chance that will happen. USCIS and State Department processing. One barrier that One barrier that will be hardest to break is the enormous backlog with both USCIS and state, says Jeffrey Gorski, senior counsel at Berry, Appelman, and Leiden, and former State Department attorney in an interview. While Biden is likely to shift resources from enforcement to adjudication, it may take a year or years to burn through the piles of unfinished work. For the State Department, once normal processing resumes, bearing in mind that some of the suspension is due to legitimate COVID-19 related concerns, and not just immigration restrictions, it may increase the visa wait times by 6 months to a year. A priority at USCIS should be to rescind memos that have slowed processing, increasing requests for evidence, and made it more difficult to gain approval of previously approved applications, such as the 2017 memo that no longer provided deference to previous adjudications. Putting the USCIS fiscal house in order will take a combination of a more reasonable fee rule, using the authority Congress provided for premium processing, and a legislative funding or loan package. Analysts believe if the Biden administration is smart, it will make a clean break from the Trump era by undoing all executive orders and proclamations on immigration that are not directly tied to health concerns related to COVID-19. That would include the most high-profile measures, such as the ban on the entry of individuals from primarily Muslim countries. Undoing the April 2020 immigration proclamation would allow immigrants in the family-sponsored and diversity visa categories to enter the United States once State Department processing is normalized. Reversing regulations, most notably the public charge rule, may take more time and be influenced by court rulings. For years, the Trump administration has placed a proposed rule on the regulatory agenda to rescind an existing regulation that allows many spouses of H-1B visa holders to work, called H-4EAD. The administration could still attempt to take some restrictive action before Donald Trump leaves office. A priority for the Biden administration should be to fix processing for H-4EADs. In a recent lawsuit, plaintiffs argued H-1B spouses cannot renew their H-4 employment authorization documents because USCIS added an unnecessary biometrics requirement and adopted an erroneous interpretation of government regulations by prohibiting automatic extensions of H-4 work authorization. Biden's immigration policy document mentions eliminating the per-country limit for employment-based immigrants. Due to per-country limits, an employment-based green card applicant from India can potentially wait decades before gaining permanent residence. Legislation to address the problem passed the House of Representatives, but a series of demands by senators, the latest being Senator Rick Scott of Florida, first slowed then blocked the bill. It is unclear whether anything will change this Congress, but if major immigration legislation moves next year, fixing the per-country limit is likely to be included. Another standalone bill may be possible as well. Over the past 4 years, it took a great deal of legal activity, including a Supreme Court ruling, to protect the legal status of more than 600,000 recipients of the Obama administration's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, otherwise known as DACA. Joe Biden said protecting dreamers will be a priority. How he protects them will matter. Biden administration attorneys will need to decide if keeping the current program intact is the best approach legally, or if a different administrative approach would work better. Continuing protections for DACA recipients is favored by a 2-to-1 margin among voters, according to poll results released by FWD.US. That does not mean a legislative solution will be easy, particularly one that goes beyond DACA recipients, which the Biden campaign has said he will pursue. Even if Democrats control the Senate, at some point during the next 4 years, some compromise on the scope of a legislative solution, i.e. how many unauthorized immigrants, other immigration measures, is expected to be necessary for a bill to become law. The Trump immigration team made it a priority to break the link between international students and their ability to work in the United States after graduation. The DOL and DHS H-1B rules, along with eliminating the H-1B lottery, would make it much more difficult for international students to work in America after completing their studies, say universities. For students considering a degree abroad, 62% mentioned that being able to work in the country following the degree is very important, according to a survey of international students by study portals. The comment period ended last month on a significant proposed rule opposed by U.S. universities to limit the period of stay for international students. New enrollment of international students in the U.S. has fallen for years while rising in other countries, and this rule would drop U.S. levels lower, generating uncertainty as to whether students can complete their studies in the U.S. in a good way to ensure that they won't come to America in the first place. Research has found the proposed student rule is based on flawed DHS reports on student overstay rates. A Biden administration may need to decide what to do with this rule. The first immigration challenge of the Biden presidency could be how to address asylum seekers at the southern border. Biden has pledged to end the process that has forced tens of thousands of asylum seekers to live in camps in Mexico, ending the camps with an orderly process and providing a new set of procedures that will affect other asylum seekers may need to be accomplished quickly. The priority will be to ensure human rights and avoid scenes of overwhelmed Border Patrol agents. It would be a disaster if, after campaigning against kids in cages, a shorthand reference to the Trump administration's family separation policies, a Biden administration created anything remotely similar. Biden officials should consider solutions that allow refugees to be interviewed outside the United States, including in their home countries, and develop solutions to enable individuals to work legally in the United States at jobs that do not require a high school degree, similar to, or even including, H-2B visas. Not everyone fleeing danger may qualify for asylum, but offering opportunities to earn a living in safety may be a desirable alternative, and it can take place in an orderly fashion. The Biden administration is likely to pursue unraveling Trump administration rules and Bureau of Immigration Appeals decisions that restrict asylum. That includes a Center for Disease Control and Prevention order that expels individuals before they are allowed to apply for asylum. Reforms to the system of immigration judges, including legislative reforms to make immigration courts independent, may be on the agenda. Joe Biden's immigration policy document states, quote, he will set the annual global refugee admissions cap to 125,000 and seek to raise it over time commensurate with our responsibility, our values, and the unprecedented global need, end quote. Donald Trump reduced the annual refugee ceiling by over 86%, down to 15,000 in federal year 2021, compared to 110,000 in the final year of the Obama administration. Biden has the authority to adjust the annual refugee ceiling after taking office, although rebuilding refugee processing and resettlement will take time. Quote, order an immediate review of temporary protected status for vulnerable populations who cannot find safety in their countries ripped apart by violence or disaster, end quote, is cited in the Biden policy document. Biden mentioned TPS for Venezuelans during the campaign, but hundreds of thousands of individuals from other countries, primarily from Central America, have lived in the United States for years and seen their TPS status ended by the Trump administration. The document mentions including such individuals in a possible legislative solution. Startup visas. Startup visas is a modest bipartisan legislative idea that could see renewed interest given the need for job creation. It was part of an immigration bill that passed the U.S. Senate in 2013. The United States does not have a startup visa for foreign-born entrepreneurs. A National Foundation for American Policy report found the federal startup program in Canada has helped create jobs and has a program run by the province of Quebec. The UK, Australia, and New Zealand also have startup visas. the Trump administration attempted to rescind a modest effort to allow foreign entrepreneurs to stay in the U.S. via parole. And finally, during the final days of his presidential campaign, Donald Trump warned people in Minnesota that Joe Biden would turn their state into a refugee camp. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, plastered the faces of dark-skinned immigrants on billboards in swing states. Building a wall to keep out foreigners remained one of the federal government's top priorities. That will change in a Biden presidency. The ICE billboards will come down, and construction crews on the border wall will go home. The difference between the two presidents' rhetoric on immigrants and refugees should be night and day. Generations of immigrants have come to this country with little more than the clothes on their backs, the hope in their heart, and a desire to claim their own piece of the American dream, reads the Biden immigration plan. It's the reason we have constantly been able to renew ourselves, to grow better and stronger as a nation, and to meet new challenges. Immigration is essential to who we are as a nation, our core values, and our aspirations for our future. Under a Biden administration, we will never turn our backs on who we are or that which makes us uniquely and proudly American. The United States deserves an immigration policy that reflects our highest values as a nation." End quote. What will be the guiding principles of a Biden-Harris administration on immigration? Well, Stephen Miller spearheaded the Trump administration's immigration agenda, working tirelessly to move the United States as close as possible to a policy of zero immigration. The simplest rule Joe Biden and his team may follow on immigration policy would be to ask, what would Stephen Miller and Donald Trump do? And then do the opposite. Well, that was from Forbes magazine, of all things. You may have noticed the emphasis on business and that sort of thing. But it's important to realize, I think, that the business community has not been on board with Trump's anti-immigration agenda. That was solely based on Trump's and Miller's and his peculiar notions about others, people from other places, and a very strong nationalist sentiment, like whoever we are, Americans, are better than these other people, and this is our land, and we don't want them coming here changing us. And that played well to probably a large portion of his base, who were not business people, I suppose some of them were business people, but a lot of them were just, nationalists like him and racists like him. And, you may bridle when I say that. But let's face it, in the 4 years that Donald Trump was in office, has been in office, he's made it pretty clear who and what he is. He rarely ever tries to be political or diplomatic. He just blah, blah, blah. I hate these people. I don't like those people. They're against us. You're for me or you're against me. I mean, that's been his kind of whole operating system this whole time. And it has been very divisive and has turned this country into practically two armed camps in a lot of ways. I mean, if anything could have initiated a second civil war, it would have been, and who knows, may yet be, Donald Trump. He's tried that hard to make this everything an us versus them thing, and by us he means himself and the people that support him. So we can no longer pretend, if there was ever really an ability to pretend, that supporters of Donald Trump supported him for other reasons, economic reasons or whatever. I mean, really, it is all boiled down to taking everything we can for us and leaving as little as possible for them, and creating this divide and it's mostly, not entirely, but mostly along racial lines, along religious lines, along ethnic lines, along social lines, all these different things. So, supporters of Donald Trump, I'm sorry, they are supporters of racism. They are supporters of bigotry. They are supporters of division and nationalism. And yeah, I mean, that's who and what he is. That is what and how he operated, and that's what he was selling. So, I don't see any way that I certainly can see people arguing with that point, but I don't see any way that anyone can argue in good faith. Would take an enormous amount of intellectual dishonesty to convince yourself that that was not the product that Donald Trump was selling. You just have to ignore like at least half or more of what he said and did in order to believe that. And I don't think that's really possible. Anyway, that's a little editorial aside, but I I don't know what to say. I mean, the election is over, so I can talk about this stuff in a way that it was more difficult to talk about during the run-up, because our FCC, our license, our everything requires us to not endorse political candidates and that sort of thing. So I couldn't tell you who to vote for and all that. But, that's been very difficult, and it has made the show very difficult for me, because the rights and the wrongs of all of these issues are so clear to me, and I think to anyone who's looking at them reasonably. If you really want to believe otherwise, you can talk yourself into it. You can talk yourself into just about anything. There are people that believe some really crazy things out there. And, there are people that are glad to feed that belief in nonsense. And that's going to be the biggest challenge of the 21st century, I think, is how to rein in mass ignorance and confusion again. Because I think, if you go far enough back in time, people lived in small communities, mainly. And so it was easy think of the Salem witch trials, for example. It was easy for sort of crazy theories to just sort of like spread. And if everybody you knew believed it, then you tended to believe it too, What can you do when everyone around you and the people in charge and everyone is saying, oh, there's witches, this is a witch, that's a witch. And you're like, well, strange things do happen. Maybe it's witches. It was easy for that kind of thing to sort of take hold in areas and kind of overwhelm people, overwhelm common sense. And then media in general, the birth of media kind of pushed that to the margins a great deal, because initially media was such a controlled thing. It was a top-down thing. It was mass media. And so the mass media comes out. So you watch the news. When I was a kid, watching the news was